It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Brian Mitchell pulled up to the front of Mitchell's Auto Emporium. The air was still heavy with the scent of fresh tires and leather polish. The showroom windows gleamed under the bright sun, a silent promise of luxury to anyone who entered. Brian, the owner of the dealership, had been in the game for nearly 2 decades. He knew the ins and outs of the trade, how to hustle, how to close the deal, and how to keep customers coming back. But lately, things had been growing a little too easy. Sitting in his office, surrounded by glossy brochures and sales contracts, Brian clicked his pen nervously. Something had changed. The cars on his lot moved fast, faster than ever, a little too fast. And every time a car left, it felt like there was something more to the transaction, something he wasn't quite seeing. Today, as he glanced through his schedule, Brian noticed a familiar name. Jack Harris, a local businessman who had recently purchased a luxury SUV from the dealership. He was back for another purchase. Brian smiled. Another easy commission. But something about Jack felt off. He was too quick to pay full price, too eager to close the deal without hesitation. The thought barely crossed his mind as he met Jack at the showroom floor. They exchanged pleasantries, and soon enough, Jack was picking out a new sports car. A model Brian had only recently acquired, one that could easily be flipped for twice its value. "Another one, Jack?" Brian asked, trying to mask his suspicion behind a friendly tone. "You sure you can handle all these cars?" Jack chuckled, his face smooth and calculating. "I like to keep my options open, you know? You've got a good selection, Brian. I trust you." Brian grinned back, though the back of his mind tugged at him. It was too smooth, too easy, but he shrugged it off. Money was money, and Jack was paying top dollar. Little did Brian know, this was just the beginning of something far darker than he could have imagined. Weeks passed, and the dealership sales figures were through the roof. Brian was on top of the world. His inventory had turned over quicker than ever, and his customers were always happy. But something else was happening behind the scenes that Brian hadn't realized yet. One evening, as Brian left the dealership late, he spotted something out of the corner of his eye. Jack Harris was driving one of the cars he had sold him just a few weeks ago. The model Brian had thought was long gone, a sleek black sports car, was now being driven by someone else. A completely different person. Brian's heart skipped. Was this a trade-in? But no, Jack had paid for the car in full. And when Brian checked his records, he found that Jack had no intention of reselling the car himself. The registration was still in his name, but the car had been sold to someone else. His stomach churned. Something wasn't right. Over the next few days, Brian started paying closer attention. More cars disappeared from his lot, sold under suspiciously quick terms, often with large, upfront payments that made it easy for him to overlook red flags. He wasn't exactly asking questions, he was too busy closing deals. It was then that he stumbled upon a whisper among his employees. "Did you hear about Jack's new venture?" One of the salesmen had mentioned. "Apparently, he's been working with some guy named Tony who owns a body shop down by the docks." Weird setup, right? Brian's curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to investigate. He had a lot riding on his reputation, and if Jack was pulling something shady, Brian needed to know. He waited until the dealership closed, then made his way to the body shop. The body shop was tucked away in a dimly lit corner of town. The building looked run down, far from the sleek, modern operations Brian was used to. But there, in the shadows, he saw something that made his stomach turn. Cars. Dozens of them. The same luxury models he'd been selling. But what was worse was the work that was being done to them. Paint jobs, engine tweaks, and body modifications. These cars weren't just being repaired. They were being cleaned, refurbished to look brand new. Brian stepped inside, his heart racing. He approached the counter where a man was cleaning the exhaust pipe of a sports car. "Tony?" Brian asked, his voice cold. The man turned, his face half hidden under a cap. He sized Brian up before offering a nod. "You're Brian Mitchell, right? Jack's guy." Brian's fists clenched, but he forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm Jack's guy. But I'm starting to think I don't know everything about what he's doing with the cars I sell him." Tony's face hardened for a moment, but then he shrugged. "Don't take it personal. Jack's been good to me. He buys cars, brings them here to clean up, and then sells them back on the street. Brian's mind was spinning. You're telling me he's stealing the cars back from me? Not stealing, Tony said, wiping his hands on a rag. Just taking them, refurbishing them, and selling them to someone else. He's got a network of clients. People who don't ask questions. Brian's heart sank. He had been a pawn in Jack's game all along. His dealership was merely a front, a source of fresh inventory for a man who had been secretly manipulating him for months. The cars Jack bought were being stolen right back and sent into the underground market, repainted and sold again at even higher prices. The next few days were a blur of frustration and fear. Brian realized the scale of what was happening. Jack wasn't just flipping cars. He was running a full-fledged scam. And now Brian was caught up in it. The realization hit him hard. He had helped a criminal syndicate profit off his own business. Every sale he'd made, every commission he'd pocketed, had been part of Jack's scheme. Brian had been blind, too eager for the fast money, to see the truth. But the truth had finally come to light, and now Brian had a choice to make. He could continue to turn a blind eye and let Jack keep profiting, or he could take a stand and expose the operation. But doing so would risk everything, his dealership, his reputation, maybe even his safety. Brian sat in his office that night, staring at the contract for the latest sale, knowing that the next move was his. Would he stay complicit in Jack's game, or would he find the courage to break free from the web of deception he had helped weave? Brian knew he couldn't keep living in the dark. He'd built his business with integrity, and if that was going to mean anything, he had to fight back. He started gathering evidence, reaching out to the authorities, and putting everything on the line to stop Jack's criminal operation. It wasn't easy. Jack wasn't a man to be taken down lightly. But with the help of law enforcement and a few loyal employees who had grown tired of the lies, Brian was able to expose the entire scheme. Jack was arrested, and the cars that had been unlawfully recycled were returned to their rightful owners. In the end, Brian's dealership survived. He learned the hard way that shortcuts and quick profits would always come with consequences. But through the chaos and betrayal, he regained his integrity and rebuilt his reputation, learning that in business, honesty is the one thing you can never afford to compromise. Brian stood in the now quiet showroom, looking out over the empty lot. It had been months since the scandal, and things were starting to settle. The dealership was thriving again, but this time he was more careful with his deals. He never forgot the lesson Jack had taught him. That greed could disguise itself as opportunity, but in the end, it always caught up with you. And as for Jack, he'd learned the hard way that no one plays the game of deception forever. Now, Brian Mitchell was a businessman once again, but he was a wiser one. This story delves into the deception within the car industry, where a trusted dealer unknowingly aids in a car theft scheme, only to discover the truth and take action. Let me know if you want to expand or adjust any part of the plot. With Greg's help, Brian began taking action. They gathered all the evidence they could, documenting Jack's illegal operations, taking photos and getting witness statements. They worked together to expose the full extent of Jack's network, making sure the authorities would have the proof needed to bring the operation down for good. But as the plan unfolded, Brian realized something else. He couldn't just stand by. He had to take a stand. He had to expose Jack, even if it meant risking his business and his own safety. The authorities moved in quickly, arresting Jack Harris and dismantling his criminal network. Brian's dealership was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the damage had been done. His trust had been shattered, and his reputation had taken a hit. Though Brian survived the ordeal, he learned a valuable lesson about trust, loyalty, and the price of greed. His business eventually recovered, but he would never forget the price he'd paid for being too blind to see what was happening right in front of him. Jack Harris's downfall was swift and brutal. But for Brian, the real lesson was in the aftermath. Never take the easy road, and always keep your eyes wide open.